Hi everyone, welcome back. Thanks for stopping by. I'm continuing to review sci-fi movies. I'm up to the 1980s right now, and today I'm going to talk about Twilight Zone, the movie. I know I'd gone through the 1983 releases I wanted to, but I forgot to cover this one, so I thought I would circle back and talk about Twilight Zone, the movie. Now, I should say at the top that there's a big asterisk beside this movie due to the tragedy that happened on set in which actor Vic Morrow and two child actors were killed in a helicopter accident. It was a horrific, tragic accident that happened. Despite it, though, production continued on the movie, and that was there's so much controversy around this, and that was controversial in itself. The fact that they continued production, but there was litigation followed this, and it was just sent shockwaves throughout the film industry. There's a book about this called Outrageous Conduct, which is provides some details on what happened, but there's a lot of information on the internet about the Twilight Zone accident and what exactly happened. So I don't want to get too much into that. I just wanted to stick to the movie, but I feel that was worth mentioning before I talk about the movie. So the concept for this was to bring together four directors, up and coming directors, and each would direct like a short film, a segment for like an anthology film. So Steven Spielberg and John Landis were brought on, who were both well established, and George Miller and Joe Dante, who were both up and coming filmmakers, were brought in to direct segments. So I know there was, like, you read about, there were ideas where characters in different segments were going to appear and that the four were going to be linked somehow, but it didn't quite work out that way. Really, it's just four separate stories with a prologue. And I should mention, so we get like a 7-minute prologue directed by John Landis. It's just Albert Brooks and Dan Aykroyd, these two guys driving at night, and they kind of get into a discussion of TV trivia, and I do like the prologue. We get the Creedence music, the Midnight Specials playing, and it kind of, it's just kind of Aykroyd and Albert Brooks riffing off each other, and it's I always liked that prologue. But then we go into the first segment, which is called Time Out. This was the one the tragedy happened. This was written and directed by John Landis. This was the only original story. And this one's basically about Vic Morrow plays a man. He's just been passed over for a promotion. He's in a bar with his friends, and he goes on a racist rant, and he's very angry and resentful. And of course, then he goes outside and suddenly finds that he's in Nazi Germany. He's been transported. He's a Jewish person in Nazi Germany being persecuted. Then later on, he's sent to the South, where he's a black man being persecuted, and eventually he ends up in the Vietnam War as well as a Vietnamese person. So I guess the point of the story was about empathy, about being from one place of privilege, and to get a sense of what it's like to be part of someone, a group, or person that's been persecuted. So it's I guess it's sort of in keeping with the TV series of Rod Serling. He did stories similar to that. I know there was a World War II episode where I believe a Japanese soldier and American soldier switched roles. So there was some precedent for that. But like I said, the story is okay. There are some striking moments, but like I said, it's a hard one to watch considering what happened during the making of it. So that was the first segment. 2 was Kick the Can. This is Steven Spielberg's segment. And I know originally Spielberg was going to do a different story. I've heard different ones. I've heard like Monsters on Maple Street, or Due on Maple Street was a famous episode from the series. And I always heard there was one about Halloween. It was going to follow a group of kids on Halloween, and a bunch of fantastical things were happening. But considering what had happened earlier in production, Spielberg did not want to do anything with special effects or anything like that. So Kick the Can, it was a remake of an episode at like a nursing home, retirement home situation, and a mysterious visitor appears in the film, played by Scatman Crothers, who gives a group of these older people a chance to be children again. And that's the story, and it's kind of a sweet little story. Most say this is the weakest of the film. It's very sentimental, very saccharine, but I used to think that. I think watching it around this time, though, I do appreciate this one more. Maybe more just getting older, and as you get further and further away from your childhood, and you start to forget what it was like to be a child. Sometimes I thought this story resonated with me. I mentioned, Scatman Crothers is the star of this one, and it has a cast. So it's also very similar to Hook, which Spielberg's Peter Pan film he would do a few years later. So there's that. So Kick the Can, take what you will from it. I like it maybe a little bit better now, but I know that's not the popular one. The third one, directed by Joe Dante. This is also a remake of a series episode, and It's a Good Life was the title of it, which is about a little boy who has like superpowers, and he's tormenting all the adults around him in this house. And like, this boy can do anything, like he can imagine anything, and so if you make him mad, he can do really bad things to you. Joe Dante really does it kind of like a dark Looney Tunes episode, where there's some interesting special effects in this one with animation. I'd be curious to know a little bit about the special effects work, because there is some good work there with animation and maybe some puppetry. And there's also an animated sequence that's really striking in this section of the film. So it's like I said, it has that real manic quality of like a Joe Dante film. Kathleen Quinlan stars in this one as she's the teacher who kind of runs into the boy at a diner, and she leads him back to the house. And so there's a lot of good character actors in this one as well. There's where's the cast for this one? Kevin McCarthy, of course, famous star of many sci-fi films. Nancy Cartwright, the voice of Bart Simpson, years later, is in this one. Dick Miller, Bill Mumy, who played the kid in the original episode. So there's some fun cameos as well in this one. The ending is kind of saccharine, though, in this one too, where the ending of the TV show was much darker, if I remember right, but in this one, there's a bit of a more optimistic ending tacked on to this version of It's a Good Life. So, and the fourth one, directed by George Miller, Terror at 20,000 Feet, remake of the famous episode with William Shatner, based on Richard Matheson's short story. And this one's really good. This one's usually I think of as my favorite, where it's John Lithgow. He's afraid of flying. He's in a plane, and you probably know the story. He thinks he sees a creature on the wing, or maybe it is a real creature on the wing, as we see. Just there's a lot. The camera movements are really good in this one. It's really, you really do feel like you're on an airplane. Lithgow's really good. It's just this guy who's terrified and paranoid, and but the lighting is good on this one. And like I said, it's interesting because George Miller before this would film a lot in just the Mad Max movies, where there's these huge wide open spaces, and this is more of a claustrophobic atmosphere, and it's interesting to see what he did with this short one, which was quite effective. The ending of the film does kind of tie to the prologue a little bit, but that's the only connection that's made between the two stories. And technically, like the lighting in the Spielberg one, I like a lot. I forgot to mention that it kind of has this twilight color to it, which is nice. And Dante's kind of has this big, colorful, kind of terrifying colors thrown at you through it, and the Miller one is much darker in tone, a much darker sheen on that one. So I do like the look of the three that all the directors brought to it. So yeah, a film with a pretty tragic legacy behind it. It's interesting Hollywood has never went back to making the Twilight Zone, another movie of it. It would be curious, like if every 10 or 12 years or so you get four filmmakers and have them do their own anthology, but that'll probably never happen. Of course, there's been reboots on TV. There's one in the '80s and one I think just a few years ago with Jordan Peele, but neither one of those quite took off. There's one in the 2000s as well, so there's been many reboots of the Twilight Zone. But I remember this movie like being on TV a lot in the '80s, like HBO or late night channels. This would pop up a lot, so it was around a lot in the 1980s. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Twilight Zone the movie. Thanks for watching.